The late summer sun hung low over the cul-de-sac, casting long shadows across the rows of neatly trimmed hedges and perfectly painted shutters. It was the kind of neighborhood where the grass seemed to grow in military precision, where cars had to be parked just so, and where an unspoken sense of surveillance lingered in the air. For outsiders, it looked like the American dream, but for those who lived there, it was more like a cage gilded with property values and HOA rules written in stone. Tasha Lewis had only been in the neighborhood for 3 weeks. She'd moved in with her 8-year-old son, Jaden, after finally buying a home she'd worked hard to afford. To her, the purchase was more than just real estate. It was a promise, a new chapter, a place where Jaden could ride his bike without fear and where she could put down roots. Yet even as she unpacked boxes and tried to settle in, she could sense the eyes on her. Neighbors would glance a little too long, whisper a little too loudly, or suddenly stop talking when she passed by. She was used to being underestimated in her career, but this was different. This was personal. That Saturday, Jaden begged to ride his bike down the cul-de-sac while Tasha watered her plants. He wore his favorite red t-shirt and a helmet a little too big for his head, but the joy in his laughter made her heart swell. She smiled, waving when he pedaled past her with all the energy an 8-year-old could muster. It was a rare, peaceful moment, until a white SUV screeched to a halt near the curb. Out stepped 2 members of the HOA board, Margaret, a sharp-faced woman with an eternal scowl etched across her forehead, and Carl, a heavy-set man who always looked like he was one complaint away from a heart attack. They marched over like soldiers on patrol, their eyes fixed on Jaden. "Excuse me," Margaret barked, her voice shrill enough to make Jaden wobble on his bike. "Whose child is this?" Tasha lowered the hose, water dripping onto the grass, and narrowed her eyes. "He's mine." "Why?" Carl crossed his arms, his tone dripping with false authority. "Children aren't allowed to ride bicycles in the cul-de-sac without HOA approval. Safety regulations." Tasha raised a brow, incredulous. "He's 8 years old. He's riding a bike, not drag racing." Margaret's lips tightened. "Rules are rules. And frankly, we've had complaints. A boy riding around unsupervised makes the neighborhood feel unsafe." "Unsafe," Tasha repeated, her voice sharpening. "I'm standing right here, watching him. How exactly is he a threat?" Before either of them could answer, Jaden rolled to a stop beside his mother. He looked up at them, confusion in his eyes. Margaret bent down slightly, trying to look gentle, but her tone was laced with condescension. "Sweetheart, why don't you come with us? We'll take you somewhere safe while your mother sorts this out." The implication hit Tasha like a slap. "Excuse me," she snapped, stepping between them and her son. "You are not taking my child anywhere." But Margaret's hand shot out anyway, gripping Jaden's wrist. The boy yelped, and Tasha's blood boiled. She grabbed Margaret's arm with a force that made the older woman flinch, her voice low and dangerous. "Let him go." Carl puffed up his chest, stepping forward. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. The HOA has the authority to intervene when residents break community guidelines." Tasha almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but her fury was too raw. "Authority? You think some neighborhood association gives you the right to put your hands on my child? That's kidnapping." But they didn't listen. Margaret tugged harder, trying to pull Jaden away. He screamed, tears streaking down his cheeks, his small body caught between them. It took every ounce of Tasha's self-control not to drop the woman on the pavement then and there. Instead, she pried Margaret's fingers off with a precision that came from years of discipline most people couldn't imagine. "Touch him again," she said, her voice ice, "and I promise you'll regret it." By then, neighbors had begun to gather, curtains twitching, phones recording, whispers rippling through the crowd. To them, it probably looked like a dramatic standoff, but no one stepped in to help. They just watched, entertained by the chaos on their perfectly manicured street. Margaret, clearly embarrassed by being overpowered, straightened her blouse and spat out, "This is unacceptable. We'll be reporting you to the board. People like you don't belong here." Those 3 words, "people like you," hung in the air like poison. Tasha caught the meaning in them, and so did everyone else. She felt the sting, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she placed a steady hand on Jaden's shoulder, grounding him, reassuring him. "You've already crossed the line," she said, her tone steady and commanding. "Now leave before you make things worse." But Margaret wasn't done. She pulled out her phone, dialing with shaking fingers. I'm calling the police. If you won't cooperate with the HOA, then maybe law enforcement will set you straight. Tasha almost pitied her. Almost. She knew exactly how this would play out, though Margaret had no clue who she was dealing with. To the HOA board, Tasha Lewis was just another homeowner they could intimidate into submission. They didn't realize that in her day job, she was Honorable Judge Natasha Lewis of the United States District Court, a woman with the authority to silence attorneys, overturn motions, and protect the innocent with the force of federal law. And now, standing in her own yard, her son trembling beside her, she felt the weight of that authority simmer beneath the surface. She wasn't just a mother defending her child. She was a judge, and these people had just put themselves in the crosshairs of something far bigger than neighborhood politics. The police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Margaret's smug smile returned as if she believed salvation was on the way. Carl muttered something about, finally teaching her a lesson. The neighbors leaned in closer, eager for a spectacle. But Tasha didn't move. She stood tall, calm, composed, her arm around her son. When the police cars pulled up, she knew the real show was about to begin, and when it was over, the HOA would wish they had never touched her child. The flashing red and blue lights painted the pristine houses in harsh streaks, turning the quiet cul-de-sac into a stage. Children pressed their faces against second-story windows, while parents stood at their doorsteps with folded arms, murmuring in hushed tones. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt, and out stepped 3 officers. The lead officer, a tall man with sharp features and mirrored sunglasses, adjusted his belt as he walked toward the crowd. Behind him, a younger officer held a notepad, eager to record, while the third stood back, scanning the gathering like he'd seen this play before. Margaret straightened, smoothed her blouse, and strutted toward them like she'd summoned the cavalry. "Officers," she cried dramatically, pointing at Tasha. "That woman attacked me. She assaulted me in front of witnesses and tried to prevent us from protecting a child who was clearly unsupervised." Gasps rippled through the neighbors, some nodding, others whispering doubts. Jaden clung tighter to his mother's hand, his wide eyes darting between the officers and the HOA members. The lead officer turned to Tasha. His expression was neutral, but the way his gaze lingered on her and her son carried weight. "Ma'am, is this your child?" "Yes," Tasha replied calmly. "He was riding his bike outside our home. These 2, she gestured at Margaret and Carl, attempted to take him without my consent. I stopped them." Margaret quickly interjected, her voice high-pitched and shrill. "She's twisting the story. She nearly broke my wrist, officer. She's dangerous. This whole neighborhood has been complaining about her since she moved in. She doesn't follow the rules, and now she's threatening us." Carl grunted in agreement, muttering, "We've had nothing but trouble since day one." The younger officer scribbled notes while the lead one lifted a hand to silence the noise. "All right, everyone calm down. We'll sort this out." He turned back to Tasha. "Ma'am, do you have ID on you?" Tasha tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She could feel the eyes of the neighborhood boring into her, waiting to see if she'd falter. But she didn't move. "Yes," she said evenly, "I do." She reached into her purse with deliberate calm, withdrawing a slim leather wallet. With a flick of her hand, she produced her driver's license, and another card. The second one she held just a little longer, letting the light catch the gold lettering embossed across its surface. It wasn't the kind of ID most people had ever seen. The officer took it, read it, and froze. His posture shifted almost instantly. The confidence in his stance gave way to careful respect, the kind reserved for people who outranked him in more ways than one. His jaw tightened as he looked from the card back to her. "Judge Lewis," he said quietly, acknowledging what the card declared. "Federal District Court." The crowd murmured, confusion spreading like wildfire. Margaret blinked rapidly, her smug expression faltering. Carl's mouth fell open, and his face turned pale. "Yes," Tasha confirmed, her voice steady. "And I suggest we have a very careful conversation about what just happened here tonight." The younger officer stopped writing mid-sentence, his pen hovering in disbelief. Even the third officer, the quiet observer, straightened, suddenly attentive. The air shifted, the entire balance of power tilting in Tasha's direction. Margaret stammered, trying to recover. I don't care who she is. She assaulted me. She threatened me in front of everyone." The lead officer's voice grew colder. What I see, ma'am, is that you attempted to physically remove a child from his parent. That's not only outside the jurisdiction of a homeowners association, it's a potential criminal offense. The color drained from Margaret's face. What? No, you don't understand. We were trying to protect him. We thought. You thought you had authority you don't possess, Tasha interrupted, her words sharp but controlled. You laid hands on my son, tried to drag him away, and when I stopped you, you called the police hoping to paint me as the aggressor. That's not protection. That's abduction. And now you've done it in front of witnesses and cameras. She gestured subtly toward the neighbors with their phones raised, recording every moment. Margaret turned, noticing for the first time how many people were capturing her humiliation. Panic flashed across her face. Carl stepped forward, his voice shaky but defiant. This is all being blown out of proportion. We were just enforcing the HOA rules. Children can't ride unsupervised, it's a safety. There is no HOA rule that supersedes parental authority, the lead officer cut in sharply. You don't get to decide who's allowed to ride a bike or who belongs in this neighborhood. Tasha placed a calming hand on Jaden's shoulder. He was still trembling, but she could feel him steadying as he realized his mother wasn't just winning, she was in absolute control. She crouched briefly, whispering to him, "You're safe. No one's taking you anywhere." He nodded, his small hand tightening around hers like an anchor. Margaret, desperate now, raised her voice again. "You can't let her get away with this. She manhandled me. I want her arrested." The officer returned the federal ID to Tasha with a respectful nod. "With all due respect, ma'am, you're the one we should be questioning. Attempting to remove a child from his parent without consent can be construed as attempted kidnapping. Assault charges could also apply." The words hit Margaret like a thunderclap. She staggered back a step, her composure unraveling. Carl looked around helplessly, searching for someone to back him up, but the neighbors were silent. Some shook their heads, others whispered disapproval. The tide had turned. Tasha straightened to her full height, her presence commanding, unyielding. "I moved here because I believed this community was a safe place for my son. Instead, in 3 weeks, I've endured stares, whispers, and now an outright attempt to take him from me. This is more than bias, it's harassment, and tonight it crossed into criminal behavior." The officer nodded gravely. "Judge Lewis, would you like to file charges?" Margaret gasped. "Charges? You can't be serious." "I am," the officer snapped, his patience gone. "This isn't your HOA board meeting. This is law enforcement. You don't get to rewrite the law to suit your prejudice." Tasha let the silence stretch, savoring the way Margaret squirmed under the weight of her own actions. Then she said, cool and precise, "For now, I want a full incident report filed. Every witness statement, every recording. And I want copies. I'll determine my next step after reviewing the evidence. But rest assured, this won't disappear quietly." The neighbors exchanged glances, some emboldened, others uneasy. Margaret's power, the petty dominance she'd wielded over this street, was evaporating before their eyes. Carl muttered something under his breath, but even he knew the battle was lost. The lead officer signaled his colleagues to begin taking statements. Phones were collected, testimonies recorded. Margaret tried to protest, but her words were drowned out by the sound of neighbors finally speaking the truth. That she had grabbed the boy, that Tasha had only defended him, that the HOA had gone too far this time. Jaden leaned into his mother, whispering, "They're in trouble, huh?" Tasha smiled faintly, brushing a hand over his curls. "Yes, baby, they are." As the police worked, she stood tall, her son safe at her side, and thought about the irony. The HOA had tried to humiliate her, strip her of dignity, and even take her child. But in their arrogance, they had revealed their ignorance, because they'd picked a fight not with just any mother, but with a federal judge. And now, the whole neighborhood knew exactly who they had underestimated. The night air grew cooler, the flashing lights slowly dimming as reports were finished. But the lesson hung heavy in the air. The HOA had crossed a line, and there would be no easy way back.